Hi everybody, welcome to the Mastercam 2021 rollouts. Today we're going to go over the general and design enhancements of what's new in 2021. First thing we're going to start off with is add history. So what add history does here is it's going to allow us to scan an existing solid model that we may have brought in from another CAD/CAM system. We could scan the whole model and we can extract all the hole geometry from this model. We could save those holes in a template, and then we can use them on a new file and simply add a hole by using the hole function. Click a point, pop one of those holes right back into a solid model. So let's see how we can do that inside of Mastercam. I have that same model that we just had up on our screen. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to Model Prep at the top of my screen. I'm going to select the option here for Add History. In Add History, we have two options. We can either select the option to Create Operations, which would scan our model and save our hole geometry, or we can switch it to Remove Features, which would physically remove those features from our model. In this case, I'm going to switch it to Create Operations. And I want to create operations based on holes. I don't want to create operations for fillets. Extruded holes would just be simple holes, like a through hole. And hole operations could be simple holes, and it can also be any combination of tapers and cylinders. So we're going to switch this thing to create operation, hole operations. The minimum radius is going to be 0. And the maximum is, I'm going to say, is 5 inches. I think the biggest rad I have here is 2 inches. So that should encompass all the holes that I have on my model. I'll hit the green check. And it finds 45 holes in my one solid body. Now that's okay, except I happen to know there's only 37 holes in the solid body. So what's actually happening if I zoom in is the hole itself is being broken up because of this radius here. So you can't have any freeform shapes, you can't have any radii when you're using Add History, only tapers and cylinders. So in this case, that rad needs to go. It's breaking up my hole into 2 separate holes. So let's go back to the drawing board for a second. And we're going to do Add History, but this time around we are going to switch it to Remove Features. Let's remove those green fillets that we had on our piece. The rads of these fillets are 0.1, so I will switch my maximum rad to 0.1. I'm going to hit the green check. I'll find my 8 fillets, and it will remove them for me. Notice there's no green on that model anymore. Now let's go ahead and do what we set off to do initially. Let's try to extract that hole data. We're going to go to Add History. We're going to select Create Operations, Hole Operations. Maximum rad is going to be 5 inches. That should once again encompass all the holes we have on our model here. Now I'm going to hit the green check. This time around it finds the appropriate number of holes. 37 holes were detected in one body. And if you look over here on my Solids tab, I have my solid body followed by 37 custom holes. And if I click on each of these custom holes, they'll highlight on my screen. I'm going to double click on this initial hole here, this one down here in the lower left-hand corner. And what I can do here is, well, first we'll take a peek and see how this hole is comprised. These are all the different steps that make up this hole. If I click on it, you can see exactly how this hole was built. If we like that hole, we want to take it and save it to a template. I'll slide up here to my template section. What I can initially do here is create a new category. So all these holes I might want to save into a specific category. I can create a new one here. I'll say New Holes 1. I have a couple categories I've created here. But okay. And then all I have to do to add this hole to this new category, I have to hit this plus down here, Add Presets. I can name this hole what I would like. I'll name it Hole 1, and it's going to go into my New Holes category. Okay, I can do that with any hole I want. I can go to the next one in my group here, do the same thing. It's already set to my category, so I'm just going to hit this add presets, and I'll make this one hole too. Now, once you build your category, your library of holes, essentially, what you could do is quickly add them back into a solid model or add them to a new model very easily. So I'm going to delete all the holes that we currently have, which is going to leave me with a solid block with a bunch of points. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my solids tab at the top of my screen. I'm going to select my hole function. And all I have to do to pop some of these holes in is simply click the positions in which I want to put those holes in place. There we go. Click my 3 points there. And right off the bat, it pops in those holes for me. I can switch in my category to other holes that I may have saved simply by clicking on the ones that I have. You can hit your drop down for your categories. You can search and your library of holes, and once again, always pop them in just by click of a button. Next big change we're going to talk about here is bounding box. So if you've been following along with any of the rollouts in the previous revisions, they've been tweaking bounding box pretty much every year. So in 2021, it's no different. What they've done in 2021, they have two big enhancements. This is the same box essentially in 2020 versus 2021. So we have a new auto feature that makes sure it picks up the smallest size box possible, regardless of the orientation in X, Y, or Z. So you can see here, in this case, since this part's kind of twisted 45 degrees, it's not aligned perfectly with the X-axis, we'll get this big box. 2021, it doesn't matter at all. Switch to auto, doesn't matter how that thing's skewed, it will pick up the smallest size box. We also have two new solid features for bounding box, silhouette boundary and a minimum volume. These are going to be really good for the big application that we see for it is multi-axis clearance operations. So when you're doing a multi-axis operation, you can create one of these solids and you can use it as the zone that your tool needs to retract to each time. So it should be pretty efficient. You can go ahead and add a little bit of an additional offset to make it a little bit safer in that regards. We'll talk a little bit about that more when we get into Mastercam here. Let me pull up the bounding box part. And we'll take a look at the initial example here of what I was mentioning is when the part's just off a little bit in X and Y. So notice how this thing's kind of essentially rotated at like a 45-degree angle. If this shaft of the part was rotated perfectly along the X, even in 2020, we can get that small box that would work for us. But when it's skewed like this, it's always kind of been a little problem. So let's see what happens here. We're going to try bounding box, click our piece, and end selection. I'm going to switch myself back to what I want to be set to here, which is rectangular and construction plane. And this is the example we're talking about. So this is what you'd always get in prior revisions. We have all this area here from the outside of our box to the part. So in reality, we'd like to be the smallest fit essentially. So all I'm going to do here is switch this thing to auto. Doesn't matter how the part's oriented in X and Y, it will find the smallest box for it. Let's do the same thing. I had it set to solid there. I just wanted the wireframe really. Click this guy, we'll do the same thing. I'm going to switch it back to construction plane. Because going in previous revisions, this is always how it's worked. Is if you had a part that was skewed in space and you created a bounding box, the bounding box itself stays normal to your WCS. But the part itself is still skewed inside of that box. So really this is useless to us. So what we came up with in 2020 is we came up with the ability to align that box with a face. So I can click face here, I can click my cursor, and I can go ahead and click this face here. It will orient the bottom of that box with my part. So it's somewhat normal essentially. In this case here though, all I had to do is really switch this thing to auto, and there we have it. So it doesn't really matter anymore. You don't really have to paint those faces to make sure it stays normal. Switch that thing to auto and it will still pick up the smallest size box possible. Let's go to this guy here and we'll take a peek at our solid enhancements. I'm going to go to bounding box, window this one because I believe it's surfaces. And if you're wondering why I had those solids turned on, I just want to mention it's because I have the solids checked. If I had unchecked that, I'd just be left with my wireframe. In this case here, we're going to switch this to wrap. And we'll take a peek at the two wrap options that we have. Silhouette boundary is the first one. I'll get rid of my offset that I have. And once again, if I get this in the right view, you'll be able to tell it's just really a 2D profile that's extruded along the Z of the part. The other one that we have here is the minimum volume. And this is the one I find a little bit more use for. It's the one that kind of looks more like a shrink wrap. We can go ahead and give this thing an additional offsets. We're in metric here, so I'll give it a little bit of an offset. And then what we can then use that thing for is we can use it for, once again, our clearance selection for multi-axis operations. Make it retract to outside of the shape each time before it rotates. Or I've also heard the suggestion of using that as a rough stock. So if you have a very big chunk of material, we can kind of rough it into this shape here, and then we can kind of go from there and start removing material as we go. The next two features we're going to talk about are more oriented for flow line functions, so editing the UV of surfaces. So if you're not too familiar with flow line functions, long story short is we want the V's and the U's of all these surfaces to flow the same way. That way, if I wrote a flow line toolpath, the toolpath would flow the way I'd want to. And same thing if I'm creating some flow line geometry, I would want my lines to all flow together. I currently would create flow lines, it would look like you see on my surface. One surface, the lines would be created 90 degrees from your next surface, essentially. We would, in reality, want it to look like this, where everything flows nicely together. So we'll take a peek at Edit UV. And the other one, which I think is a little bit more powerful, is REFLOW UV. So if you've ever used a flow line toolpath before, like let's use the example, if we were to use a flow line toolpath on this circle that you see here on the upper row. If we were to use a flow line on that circle, we would either be cutting up and down or side to side based on the UV of that surface. That cross hatching you see is the UV. All we have to do to reflow that entire UV is select the outside perimeter. So in this case here, all I've done is I've chained that circle, and it has then reset those flow, the UV to be concentric. It's now in a circle, it's not crosshatched like it was before. If I were to write a toolpath on that, my tool would run concentrically around that surface. Okay, so let's take a peek at what that looks like in Mastercam. We'll start with just taking a look at the Edit UV. And before I show you how to do that, I just want to show you, for those who aren't familiar with flow line functions and what I'm talking about here, I'm going to use a curve flow line, which is one of my favorite functions, if I'm being honest. Just as a quick tip, if you ever want like a nice line right down the middle of a surface, you can use this curve flow line. Set your number to 3, you can click your surface, and you'll be able to get a nice line that flows right down the middle of that surface. So I use this a lot for various things, but in this case, it will be a good indicator of what we're actually seeing on our surfaces. So set my number to 10, and I'm just going to click a few of these surfaces, and what you'll notice is they're all perpendicular from each other. When I create the lines that run off the U, my U is running this way on one surface, it's running the opposite way on the next. Same thing with these two, and we'd like everything to flow in the same direction. So let me get rid of those lines, and we'll take a peek at how to edit that UV. Surfaces, Edit UV, window everything we've got here. And after I hit enter, I get to see all my UVs. And what I can do in here is I can go ahead and get clicking and start trying to get everything oriented in the same direction. If you click on the V axis, it just flips it one way or the other. Same thing with the U. You want to flip-flop the U and the V axes. You just click on the ball in the center, and it will flip-flop those for you. So I can go through each of these surfaces and orient it that way. There is a nice button here called Propagate, where I can go ahead and simply click on this button, find a surface that I like. I like how this UV is set up here. I'd like to apply that to all the rest of my surfaces. If that's the case, all I have to do is click the surface, and it will orient all the other UVs appropriately. So once you've done that, you can, just to show you, we can go back to curve flow line. And as I click now through my curve flow line, everything is going to start to flow the way we'd want to. Same thing with the toolpath. If we were to write a flow line toolpath now, we'd get this nice motion. We're not going to have one surface cutting 90 degrees, the next surface cutting the correct way, essentially. Let's take a peek at the REFLOW UV. So once again, now we're going to change essentially the entire UV of the surface and how it flows. So in this case, before I even do that, let me write a quick toolpath for you. We're just going to do a flow line. And we're going to do it on this guy right here. So when I unshade it and I look at that surface, my toolpath's either going to run up and down this way or side to side based on that cross hatching of that UV. Let's try that. Select that surface to machine. And when I go into my flow line page here, which everyone loves, you can see that I'm either cutting this way, side to side, from 3 o'clock to the 9 o'clock, or from 6 to 12. Or we got a little bit of a bend here too, but either way, that's not what I'm looking for. I'd like to run concentric. That's what I'm looking to do here. Start my tool on the outside, maybe spiral my way into center, something of that nature. So that's fine for now. I'll hit the green check. And I'm just going to give it a crude step over, or crude tolerance and step over here, so we're not waiting for this thing to generate it at all. And let's see what it comes up with. If I play this thing through in backplot, it's exactly as we'd anticipate. It's just going to go ahead and cut back and forth. Sorry if that's a little choppy on your end. I'll try to play that through slowly. But long story short, it's going up and down, and it's not running concentrically like we would hoped it would. So let's go ahead and try to change that here. We're going to go back to surfaces at the top of our screen. We're going to try the option here for REFLOW UV. My prompt tells me to select a surface. Go ahead and click on the surface right here. I then get my chaining dialog that pops up, and it's asking me, what chains do I want to use to reflow my UV? I'm going to go ahead and grab the perimeter of that circle. And right off the bat there, if I zoom in, might be a little hard for you guys to see. It's this kind of faint pink spider web looking shape. That's my new UV. I'll hit enter here, and I'll hit the green check. You should be able to see it a little bit better now. This green surface, I can now see it looks like a spider web. It runs concentric. All I have to do is regenerate my toolpath, and I should be able to get something. We'll switch to spiral here, do it in zigzag. Oh, making a liar out of me. Let's go back to this page here really quick. Flow line, direction needs to be concentric, and let's see what that looks like. That's much better. So now if we play this thing through, just by changing the UV of the surface, don't mind how choppy that is. I have a 1 millimeter tolerance. It should spiral right into the center. So same thing here. We can easily do this on this surface as well. We'll go to Surfaces, REFLOW UV. Click the surface, chain the perimeter. Green check. Green check again. That's all it takes. I can write a flow line on that. I can run now concentrically rather than going back and forth like a raster toolpath. All right, let's do it on one more surface here. We're going to do it on this big one. And this is actually really slick. What we're going to do first is I'll just give you your normal flow line toolpath, and we'll see what that looks like first. And I'll have it cut up and down. And once again, I'll give it a crude step over with crude tolerance, just so we're not waiting for it to generate here. And also I'm going to switch that to zigzag, just so we don't see a bunch of retracts. All right, there we go. So currently what's happening is it's just running like a square. It's just running back and forth on this thing. Maybe I wanted to flow between these two curves. I could select this surface, tell it to flow between these curves or these two, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do it between the two big ones here. I go back to surfaces, try reflow UV. Click that surface. And I did want to make a point of this, that when you guys are selecting these curves, I'll say this, if you ever remember taking a surfacing class with us, and you do a lofted surface, you always want to select the chains in the same direction. If you don't, you end up with a bow tie shape. In this case, if I select them in the same direction, I get said bow tie shape. So it looks really goofy, won't work out too well for you either. So what we really want to do here in this case is select our surface, and when we select these curves, you need to select them in the opposite orientation of each other. So one going up, the other going down. I'll hit the green check, gives me my nice surface. I'll hit the green check again up here. That looks good to me. Let me go ahead and make sure it didn't get rid of my geometry here. And let's see how our flow looks. And what I like about this is it's kind of like a poor man's blend toolpath. So a blend toolpath, if you're not familiar with it, will always blend between two pieces of wireframe geometry. You could say cut this surface, but I want you to cut this shape as you're over towards this line. As you move to the right, I want you to start cutting this shape. And that's literally exactly what we have here. We have a nice blend toolpath that blends between those two shapes as it goes ahead and cuts that surface. So if you're not too familiar with blend, but you're a fan of flowline, this might be a good option for you to try out. All right. Let's move on here. I got a couple small things for us. Mirror. So previously, we'd only be able to mirror over a single axis at one time. You can either mirror over the X or the Y. You can now mirror over both axes with one click. Mirror over X and Y axes. Raster to vector. So what raster vector is, if you're not familiar with it, is it's a function that allows you to take a logo like this, bring it into Mastercam, and take that, change it into wireframe so you can go ahead and machine it or do whatever you'd want with it. In prior revisions, raster to vector has been a C-hook. If you're not familiar with that, it's an external application, or external applications that run from Mastercam. They're just separate DLL files that you have to use. So it's now made its way into the actual software, and you don't need to have art to run it. So at some point you needed art to run raster vector. Anybody can use this now as long as you have a seat of Mastercam. So feel free to try to find a logo, bring it into Mastercam, and being honest, these guys did a pretty shoddy job. As you can see, the red is where the wireframe is, so it kind of doesn't necessarily follow the letters. One thing I wanted to mention with this, if you're going to try it, you need to have a high-res photo to get high-res results. So a lot of times I've been sent really low-quality logos, and no matter how hard you try, it's going to be difficult to get a good result out of that. So if you are going to try this, make sure you have, search for like a large photo on Google Images. Make sure you have a big, nice, high-res photo before you give that a shot. Editing with drag mode. So they introduced drag in 2019, and it was only available for divide delete functions. So how this works is if you hold down your mouse button, you can drag your cursor into things that you'd want to divide and delete. They've expanded that functionality in 2021 to fillet, chamfer, and trim functions. So let's take a peek at what that looks like inside of Mastercam really quick. All right, so I'm going to zoom in on these 3 squares up here, and I'm going to show you what we've had the ability to do. If you click on divide, I hold down my mouse button, I start to leave this trail behind me. And as I contact certain pieces of geometry, it will go ahead and begin to delete them. So I can go as crazy as I want with this thing. You can really delete everything. It's divide, delete. So once again, you don't have to click everything. You could just simply hold down your mouse button, drag your cursor across what you want to delete. So in 2021, they've expanded this functionality to all trim functions and then chamfer and fillet functions as well. So let's try the trim functions first. I'll switch myself to trim 2 entities. And I wanted to mention the same logic applies. So for the trim functions, if you're familiar with them, you want to select the portion of the line you want to keep. So if I want to get rid of this portion of the line and this portion, I don't want to touch these 2 portions because that's what it's going to keep, not delete. So in our case, I want to go ahead and get rid of these 2 lines. I'm just going to simply touch this portion of it and this portion of it here. Same thing down here. One thing I have noticed too is you can't go too fast. So try to mess it up for you here. But if I go really quickly through here, well, of course, I'm just too good. It worked. So right there. So if I move too quickly, it won't pick up your selection. So don't move too fast. Try to slow down a little bit and you will get the results that you're looking for. Let's take a peek at the fillet and chamfer options. So it's the same thing. If I want to put a fillet or chamfer on this corner here, all I have to do is touch these 2 lines and I'll get that result. I'll still do the trimming for you since I have trim entities selected here. Trim off any excess that you have. And lastly, same thing with chamfer, that's no different. I can slide through here and I can go ahead and put some chamfers on this piece if I want. And so no different really than what you've had in the past, just a little bit different way to do it, might be a little faster for you. Whole axis. So for those of you out there who use whole axis, it's a really great function that you can use to give yourself a circle at the top and bottom of your hole, especially that's really helpful when you're drilling on the OD of lathe parts to get a flat circle to be able to select. It'll also give you an axis that come out of that hole, so you can use that for multi-axis operations if you need to. What they did in 2021 is they allowed you to now select multiple solid bodies. So previously, if you held down the control key on your keyboard and you clicked the 10mm hole, it would only highlight the 10mm holes on that solid that you selected. So now with this new allow multiple solid bodies function, we can do that same thing and have it select the 10mm holes on all of our parts. Changing face color, it's another small change they came up with, but it will save you some clicking if you do any of this. So I know a lot of customers out there who color code their holes or faces for how they need to be machined. Let me show you really quick what I'm talking about if you're not familiar with changing face color. I'm not talking about changing the actual solid color. So I'm not talking about taking this solid here and actually changing the color of the whole thing. What I'm more talking about is changing the actual face individually. So if you've never done this, it's under the Model Prep tab, change face. So what you can now do in 2021 is we don't have to individually select faces anymore, excuse me. We can just go ahead and window our piece, hit the green check here, and I've set multiple faces now just by windowing those to that color. In previous revisions, the only option we had was clicking faces. So if you wanted to paint all these holes, you'd have to physically click them, click the cylinder, click the bottom. So now if we need to window a bunch of holes, we can just window it, change the color just by, once again, just by creating a window and doing one click. There has been a whole lot of changes to the note function in Mastercam, so drafting notes. If you do any any decent bit of that, you'll notice a big change in 2021. Here's the old 2020 interface. These 2 pages here are the 2021 interface. If you guys have followed us at all and you've remembered previous rollouts, which I don't, so I don't really blame you two if you forget. But in 2019 or 2020, the letters option in the wireframe tab got a big overhaul, and this got the same kind of thing. So pretty much in 2021, what you can now do with letters, or I'm sorry, with notes rather, is it helps you place the text where you want. So you can do horizontal text, vertical text, you can do it mirrored over a certain point. You can create your text about an arc, specific radius, and then you have text functions up here. You can make it bold, italicized, underlined. You can do outline, orient your text to the left, middle, right, symbols, so on and so forth. So nothing too earth-shattering, but if you do a lot of drafting, it should definitely help you. You can place your notes on your screen. You can then have a box around it. You can drag and resize the text to make it easier to fit in with whatever else you're dimensioning. So really slick. So if you do a lot of drafting, that will help you out for sure. 3D PDF files. I think this is pretty slick too. This is going to be really good for the times where you have to send a part to somebody who may not have the CAD/CAM software. So you're sending a part to a customer who doesn't have Mastercam or Autodesk or SolidWorks, and they want to take a peek at it. Maybe you're sending it to someone in the front office. You can do what you could do here is save it as a 3D PDF, and it comes in just like this. But if you hold down your mouse button like you would want to in Mastercam, you can rotate this thing around 360 degrees and take a peek at any aspect of it. So once again, it'd be really helpful for those times you got to send a part to someone who may not have the functionality to look at the part. Display all selected arrows. So I've been chaining some contours before, and I want to make sure they're all going in the same direction. Previously, you'd have to get out of the toolpath, go in the geometry page, and click on those chains to see how they're pointing. 2021, we have a quick button that will do that for us. As we're chaining along here, we can click this little squiggly line button. It'll show me on my screen every single chain that I have and which way my arrows are pointing. Chaining mode persists. So in 2021, what that means for us is chaining stays modal. So for example, if we look at this right here, if I go and I chain something with 3D and partial, the next time I go to chain something, it will be set to 3D and partial. It always saves what you've done last. This will eliminate the need to go into the configuration page, tell Mastercam what rigid way that you always want to chain things. So it'll always flow kind of with what you're actually doing. Some solid chaining enhancements here. They've improved the loop selection. So you can see here we're grabbing the loop from the back end of this part. Highlights really nice so you can see exactly what you're selecting. And it's not even just from selecting it from the back of the part. If you hovered over the top here and tried to grab this loop, it highlights much better than it would in previous revisions, so you know exactly what you're selecting. Also in previous revisions for solid chaining, we used to be set with 3D and face mode, which kind of was interesting, seeing as wireframe has the C-plane option. So 2021, it's now C-plane and 3D. It works exactly as it would with wireframe chaining, so it makes a little bit more sense for all of us. A couple chaining enhancements. This dynamic start point. This was added in 2019 or 2020. This is was available only for wireframe chaining. So how it works is you chain something. If you want to move your start point, all you have to do is click this button, and then you could slide your cursor along the chain, put that start point wherever you want. So we now have this in 2021 for solid chaining as well. And lathe chaining, for solid chaining, it now uses the spin profile by default. If you're not a lathe guy, that might not mean a whole lot to you. Long story short is sometimes you want to take your part and spin it 360 degrees. So you get the outermost portion of the profile. Sometimes the other option we have is slice, where it will just take a hot knife, slice your part, and you might not get the outermost portion of all those features. So Spin profile is the safe way to go. It now uses that by default for solid lathe chaining. This is my personal favorite change with 2021. You no longer have to name your stock models. So might seem like a small change, and it is tiny, but it always used to drive me nuts when I'd go to finish up my stock model and it says you haven't named your stock model. Like, why do I have to? Well, good thing is we don't have to worry about that anymore. It now names your stock model every time for you. So it names it 1, next one will be 2, and it goes in numerical order from there. For zip-to-go files, this is more for you guys than it is for us, the ease of installing post files going forward. So if you've ever gotten a file, post files from me, I send it over in a zip with instructions where you have to copy and paste all those files. Thankfully now in 2021, what I can do is I can send you a .content file, which what you have to do with that is simply drag it on top of Mastercam 2021, and it will extract all those post files into the proper locations automatically for you. Even if you have your stuff on the network, it will look at your registry, see where you have things pointed, and it will put them in the right spot. So going forward, you shouldn't have to be tasked with putting all your posts in the correct spot. Just drag and drop, and you should be good to go. Other than that, I don't have too much for you. I wanted to mention that you guys can always give us a shout at mastercam@optipro.com to reach all of us if I'm unavailable. If you ever want to get in touch with me, we all do support here. I do a little bit of post work as well, so if you ever have any post questions, feel free to send those over.